Sarah Miller stared at the clock on her kitchen wall as it ticked past 5:30 a.m. Outside her apartment window, Chicago was still draped in darkness, the city skyline a collection of twinkling lights against the pre-dawn sky. At 42, she had spent 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm, achieving the director title she had always wanted, yet something fundamental was missing. The self-help book she had skeptically purchased last week lay open on her counter. Its central premise highlighted dedicate 1 focused hour each day to what truly matters and watch your life transform. With a mixture of doubt and desperate hope, she laced up the running shoes that had gathered dust in her closet for months. The lakefront path was nearly empty as Sarah's feet hit the pavement for the first time in almost a year. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold spring air as she alternated between walking and short bursts of jogging. Her muscles protested, her lungs burned, and the voice in her head listed all the emails awaiting her attention. But she had made a commitment. 1 hour, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., belonged to her physical health now. No phone, no emails, no excuses. Just movement and the gradually lightening sky over Lake Michigan. 3 miles away, in a modest apartment in Pilsen, Miguel Hernandez sat at his kitchen table, digital drawing tablet, positioned before him as his wife and children slept. At 36, he had spent 15 years working as a graphic designer for various companies, creating other people's visions, while his own artistic aspirations withered. The clock on his microwave read 5:15 a.m. He had exactly 1 hour before his regular morning routine needed to begin, preparing breakfast for the kids, organising school bags, and heading to his corporate job. His fingers hovered nervously over the tablet. He hadn't created original art in years, but something had to change. The idea was simple, yet daunting. 1 hour of personal creativity every morning before the demands of the day consumed him. 2,000 miles west, in Portland, Oregon, Elijah Washington closed his laptop with a sense of accomplishment. The rain tapped gently against his apartment windows as the clock hit 11 p.m., marking the end of his dedicated hour. At 28, he had been talking about writing a novel since college graduation, but somehow life, his job as an IT specialist, social obligations, streaming services, had always gotten in the way. 6 weeks ago, he had made a decision. From 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. each night, he would write. No exceptions, no excuses. Tonight, he had added another 500 words to his manuscript, bringing the total to just over 15,000. The progress was slower than he had initially hoped, but undeniably real. Elijah stretched and glanced at the corkboard above his desk, where he had pinned a calendar. Each completed writing session was marked with a red X, 42 consecutive days so far. The streak had acquired a strange power over him. The thought of breaking it now seemed unthinkable. There had been nights when exhaustion or social invitations had tempted him to skip, but the simplicity of the commitment, just 1 hour, had made it possible to persevere. He had discovered that he could endure almost anything for 60 minutes, and those minutes, strung together over weeks, were producing something that had previously existed only in his imagination. Across town, in a craftsman-style house in southeast Portland, Maya Chen sat cross-legged on a yoga mat in her home office, the space transformed by the removal of her desk chair and the addition of a small altar with a candle. At 55, the elementary school principal had spent decades caring for others, her students, her staff, her aging parents, and her own children. Stress and responsibility had accumulated in her body as chronic tension and in her mind as constant mental chatter. The meditation timer on her phone showed 7 minutes remaining in her hour. Her practice wasn't perfect. Thoughts continually arose about tomorrow's budget meeting and her daughter's college applications. Yet each time, with increasing ease, she returned to her breath. 1 hour, from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., had become non-negotiable time for her mental health. Back in Chicago, Sarah Miller's alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m., pulling her from deep sleep. Outside, rain pelted her windows, and her bed felt impossibly comfortable. Every fibre of her being wanted to hit snooze and abandon her lakefront run. It had been 3 weeks since she had begun her daily hour of exercise, and while she had noticed small improvements in her energy and mood, this morning the old voice returned with renewed force. "This is ridiculous. One day won't matter. You deserve to rest." Her hand hovered over her phone, tempted to reset the alarm for her usual 6:45 a.m. wake-up time. In that critical moment of hesitation, Sarah remembered something she had read about habit formation, how the brain creates resistance before a new pattern is fully established, and how giving in reinforces the old pathways rather than the emerging ones. With tremendous effort, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she muttered, pulling on leggings and a waterproof jacket. "It just has to happen." 20 minutes later, she was jogging through the rain, initially miserable, but gradually finding rhythm as her body warmed up. By the time she returned home, soaked but invigorated, she recognized the subtle power of overcoming her own resistance. In Pilsen, Miguel Hernandez faced a different kind of obstacle. After 3 weeks of morning drawing sessions, he stared at his tablet with growing frustration. The image taking shape beneath his stylus felt amateur, derivative, nothing like the vibrant work he had imagined creating. Years of corporate design had trained him to produce safe, commercially viable images quickly, but his personal artistic voice had atrophied. Self-doubt crept in, questioning whether his daily hour was being wasted on a juvenile fantasy of becoming a real artist at his age. He nearly closed the file, tempted to use his precious morning hour for something more practical, like updating his professional portfolio. Elijah Washington nervously adjusted his glasses as he entered the local coffee shop where the Portland Writers Network hosted their monthly gathering. Under his arm, he carried printed copies of the first 3 chapters of his novel, pages produced entirely during his dedicated nightly hours. At nearly 2 months into his new routine, he had realized that writing in isolation was becoming increasingly difficult. Questions about plot structure and character development plagued him, and the echo chamber of his own thoughts was becoming a limitation. He needed external input, but sharing his work terrified him. The group of 8 writers welcomed him warmly, their backgrounds diverse, from published poets to aspiring screenwriters. When his turn came to share, Elijah's voice trembled slightly as he distributed his pages. As they read silently, he fought the urge to snatch the papers back or qualify his work with preemptive apologies. The feedback, when it came, was a mixture of encouragement and constructive criticism. Some plot elements needed reworking, but several readers expressed genuine interest in his characters. Most valuable was the simple validation that he was, in fact, writing a real novel, not just playing pretend. He left with renewed motivation and specific issues to address during his next week of daily sessions. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Sarah Miller had discovered the power of external accountability in sustaining her morning exercise routine. After confiding in a colleague about her 1-hour-a-day commitment, she had been surprised when Lisa from the accounting department revealed she had been trying to establish a similar morning fitness habit. They began meeting 3 days a week at 6 a.m. near the lakefront path, their shared commitment making it harder for either to bail when motivation waned. On the days they didn't meet, they sent each other confirmation texts after completing their solitary sessions. What had begun as a deeply personal struggle was evolving into a connection that enriched both their professional relationship and their individual goals. Maya Chen's meditation practice faced its greatest test when her mother's health declined suddenly, requiring a week-long hospitalization followed by daily visits to the rehabilitation facility. Her carefully constructed routine, dinner, light housework, then meditation from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., became impossible to maintain. Sitting in the hospital waiting room after a full day at school, she felt the familiar tension headache building and recognized the irony. This was precisely when she needed her practice most, yet circumstances had torn apart her ritual. That evening, returning home exhausted at 11:30 p.m., she faced a critical choice. Rather than abandoning her hour completely, Maya adapted. She set her alarm for 5 a.m., allowing for 45 minutes of meditation before her usual morning routine began. The earlier wake-up was difficult, and her practice felt different in the dawn light, her mind foggy in ways it wasn't in the evening. But the act of prioritizing this time, especially when life provided every excuse to let it go, transformed her hour from a pleasant ritual into a profound statement of self-commitment. On particularly chaotic days, she divided her hour into smaller segments, finding 10 minutes in her office during lunch, 15 minutes in her car before entering the rehabilitation center, and the remaining time before bed. In Portland, Elijah's writing routine collided with an unexpected career opportunity, a special project at work that required evening hours, directly conflicting with his established writing time. The temporary assignment came with both additional pay and visibility to senior management. After 2 months of unwavering dedication to his hour, he now faced a dilemma that tested his priorities. The project would last 3 weeks, potentially derailing his hard-won habit. After careful consideration, he negotiated with himself. His writing would shift to 5:30 a.m., before work, for the duration of the project. The adjustment was painful. He was naturally a night owl, but the alternative, losing his daily practice entirely, seemed unacceptable after experiencing its cumulative power. 3 months into his morning drawing practice, Miguel Hernandez noticed subtle but significant changes. Though still far from his artistic aspirations, his work had developed a consistency and personal style that had been absent in those first frustrating weeks. More surprisingly, his professional design work had improved as well. The creative blocks that had plagued him previously occurred less frequently, and his solutions to client problems showed greater originality. His supervisor had commented positively on his recent projects, unaware of the daily practice fueling this evolution. What had begun as a somewhat desperate attempt to reclaim a neglected passion was quietly transforming his entire relationship with creativity. One evening, instead of his usual digital work, Miguel experimented with physical media, ink, and watercolor. Techniques he hadn't touched since art school. His 11-year-old daughter, Lucia, normally sound asleep during his early morning sessions, wandered into the kitchen and watched him work. "That's really cool, Dad," she said, genuinely impressed. "Could you teach me sometime?" The request, so simple and unexpected, revealed another dimension of his commitment's impact. His daily practice wasn't just changing him, but was beginning to influence how his children viewed creative pursuits. The following Saturday, they spent 2 hours together at the kitchen table, Miguel teaching Lucia basic watercolor techniques, her younger brother eventually joining out of curiosity. After allowing herself 24 hours of disappointment, Sarah reconsidered her situation. The commitment had never actually been to running specifically. It had been to dedicating an hour to her physical well-being. Working with a physical therapist, she developed an alternative routine of upper body strengthening, gentle stretching, and rehabilitation exercises for her ankle. Though less endorphin-producing than her runs, this modified hour maintained the psychological commitment while addressing her immediate physical needs. By the time she could run again, she had gained upper body strength she had previously neglected, a reminder that obstacles, properly navigated, often lead to more complete development. In Portland, Elijah faced a different kind of crisis. After 8 months of daily writing, producing over 65,000 words of his novel, he hit a plot problem he couldn't solve. For 5 consecutive nights he sat at his desk during his designated hour, attempting to write through the block, but producing only fragments he later deleted. Self-doubt, mostly quieted during months of steady progress, returned with devastating force. The writers' group, usually helpful, offered contradictory suggestions that only confused him further. For the first time since beginning his practice, he questioned whether his hour was being wasted on a project destined to fail. 9 months into her meditation practice, Maya Chen experienced a profound internal shift during an ordinary session. As she sat in the familiar space of her home office, following her breath, a lifetime pattern suddenly became visible to her: her tendency to derive self-worth almost exclusively from helping others. This pattern, previously unconscious, had driven her incredible professional success, but at significant personal cost. The recognition wasn't intellectual, but visceral, bringing tears that flowed freely as she maintained her meditation posture. That evening marked a turning point, not an abandonment of her service-oriented values, but a fundamental rebalancing that would gradually reshape her relationships both at work and home. In the following weeks, Maya began setting boundaries that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. She delegated projects she would previously have handled personally, declined additional committee responsibilities despite her expertise, and most significantly, began speaking more directly about her own needs to family members who had grown accustomed to her endless accommodation. These changes created initial friction, particularly with her adult daughter, who had relied heavily on Maya's childcare assistance. Yet as the new pattern stabilized, her relationships gained authenticity and mutual respect that had been partially missing beneath the surface harmony of her people-pleasing approach. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Sarah Miller's relationship with achievement itself was transforming. Her daily hour had begun as another goal-oriented activity: measurable distances, pace improvements, fitness milestones. Yet somewhere around the 8th month, particularly during her injury recovery, the nature of her commitment had shifted. The hour had become valuable not primarily for its outcomes, but for its process. The simple act of showing up for herself with consistency, regardless of external validation or visible results. This subtle shift extended into her professional life, where she found herself less frantically driven by metrics and recognition, more focused on the inherent quality and meaning of her work. Colleagues noticed a paradoxical increase in her effectiveness coupled with a noticeable decrease in her anxiety. 1 year after beginning his daily creative hour, Miguel Hernandez stood nervously at a small community art gallery in Pilsen, surrounded by 15 frame pieces, a combination of digital illustrations and traditional media that comprised his first exhibition. The show, titled La Hora Magica, The Magic Hour, represented the culmination of 12 months of daily practice. Not every piece had been created during his morning sessions, but each had been born from the creative renewal that his commitment had generated. Friends, family, colleagues, and neighborhood residents circulated through the space, their reactions ranging from polite interest to genuine admiration. What moved Miguel most deeply was not the modest commercial success of the evening, though selling 7 pieces exceeded his expectations, but the conversation with his children afterward. His daughter Lucia, now 12, asked thoughtful questions about his artistic choices, while his 9-year-old son proudly told relatives how his father made art even when he's super tired or busy. Miguel realized that beyond the tangible output of his creative practice, he had modeled something far more valuable: persistent commitment to one's deeper aspirations despite the constraints of adult responsibilities. The exhibition wasn't an endpoint, but a milestone in what had become a fundamental aspect of his identity and family culture. Across the country, in their separate cities, Sarah, Elijah, and Maya marked their own 1-year anniversaries in quieter ways. Sarah, with a sunrise run along a new lakefront route. Elijah by completing the first full draft of his novel, Maya, with a special meditation session followed by writing reflections on her journey. None of their lives had been completely transformed in dramatic, externally visible ways. They hadn't changed careers, achieved fame, or accumulated wealth through their daily practices. Yet something essential had shifted within each of them, a reclamation of agency, a discovery that small, consistent actions could gradually reshape not just habits, but identity itself. The simple premise that had initially seemed both compelling and slightly suspect had proven true. 1 hour a day really was all they needed. Not to achieve perfection or transcend ordinary challenges, but to become more fully themselves, one day, 1 hour at a time.